Wonderful. Well, so glad all of you could join us this afternoon. I think we'll go ahead and get started. I know a couple people are still filing into the room, the virtual room, but hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I am delighted to welcome you to In the Key of Innovation, fine-tuning innovation in your organization. Before we get started, please note that we are recording today's session, and it will be available online from both Settlement and Innosight after the conclusion of this event. So as I set the stage, as I mentioned before, if you missed this part, we would love for you to use the chat function to just tell us where you're joining us from. And of course, if you'd like to share which organization you're with. I think we've already seen, I think the farthest dial-in was from Chicago. If you can beat that, please go for it. Also, there will be a chance throughout our event to provide some interactive responses. And for that, we're using Slido. Slido is a website, separate website. So if you'd like to get ready for that, please point your browser to slido.com, as indicated on the slide here, and then use the code settlement, right? And that will take you into the appropriate Slido forum, and you'll be all ready for the interactive portions of our event. And then finally, if you have questions during the presentation at any time, please enter them in the Zoom using the Zoom Q&A button. That's actually separate from the chat, but that will save those questions. And of course, we'll try to address as many of those as we can throughout this afternoon's event. All right, diving in. My name is Youngmoo Kim. I have the great privilege of directing the Excite Center at Drexel, which is our university's Institute for Technology and Creative Expression. My background is both in music and technology, and our center has been privileged to partner with leading cultural institutions in the region, including, of course, Settlement Music School. We worked with Settlement's Director of Education, Karen Ornstein, on teaching music production, which eventually developed into a fully virtual program that was done entirely on smartphones in response to the pandemic. At Excite, we are always happy to partner with organizations like Settlement who have embraced a culture of innovation. Joining me are, of course, Helen Eaton, CEO of Settlement School, and Natalie Painchaud, Director of Learning at Innosight. The discussion today will center on how to create a culture of innovation, which is actually the subject of a book co-authored by Natalie called Eat, Sleep, and Innovate: How to Make Creativity an Everyday Habit Inside Your Organization. I think Helen needs no introduction, but of course, Helen Eaton has been the CEO of Settlement Music School since 2010. In 2016, she was named one of the top 30 innovators by Musical America Worldwide, and just this year received one of the highest honors in the field, the Arts Education Award from Americans for the Arts. Welcome, Helen. Natalie Painchaud is an early member of Innosight and leads the firm's internal training strategy by designing and delivering development programs for the global consulting team and the professional staff. She also creates learning and leadership development initiatives for Innosight's clients and customized learning programs for senior leaders at Fortune 500 companies. Welcome, Natalie. So, for those of you who aren't as familiar with these two organizations, I would like to hand it first to Helen Eaton to tell you all about Settlement. Helen?
Thank you so much, Youngmoo. Settlement was founded in 1908, and we offer lessons, classes, and ensembles in music, dance, and creative arts therapy to students of all ages. The school has 6 branches, including a new digital branch launched this year, Settlement Music Online. In a typical year, we collaborate with 50+ community partners and provide over $2.6 million in financial aid to 60% of our students, ensuring that everyone can afford a high-quality arts education. Settlement is truly a community school of the arts and part of the fabric and history of Philadelphia, with each branch as a safe, welcoming space. In fact, on election day, 4 of our branches served as polling sites while our faculty performed for voters waiting in line. I'm so pleased to be joined today by Natalie Painchaud. We had the good fortune of first connecting with Innosight in 2012, when a team of Innosight consultants from Boston worked for 9 months with Settlement teaching us the process of how to innovate at our legacy institution without ever losing sight of our mission. In fact, enhancing our mission-based work. Innosight showed us that with the right systems, people, and structure in place, we could innovate and intentionally redefine our understanding of success. We continued to learn from Innosight over the next several years and followed their work closely, including Scott Anthony's In Dual Transformation, another great book from the Innosight team. Settlement has used all of the tools that we have learned from Innosight to understand our stakeholders' needs, to increase student enrollment and earn revenue, and to attract major new funders. We were delighted to be included in Eat, Sleep, Innovate as a case study along with Microsoft, Procter & Gamble, the Salvation Army, and UNICEF. And Innosight generously offered us a team to work with in May as we launched our virtual branch, Settlement Music Online. And I'd like to turn it over to Natalie so she can share a bit more about Innosight.
Great. Thanks so much, Helen and Youngmoo. I'm thrilled to be here today. And this is, as a consultant, what we live for, seeing the impact of our work. A little bit about Innosight, and I'll start by sharing our purpose. Our purpose is to empower forward-thinking organizations to navigate disruptive change and own the future. And each one of those words was selected with quite some care. So I'd like to just share a little bit about each one. Empower. So as Helen mentioned, we write a lot of books, we write a lot of articles, and that is all about putting the theories, the frameworks, the tools into the organization's hands that we are privileged to work with. Forward thinking, we focus on problems in the future, and we help organizations navigate disruptive change where there's a lot of uncertainty. We were co-founded just about 20 years ago by the late and great, just wonderful Clayton Christensen from the Harvard Business School. And Clay's work focused around the singular question, which is, why is success so hard to sustain within organizations? And every theory, framework we put together is targeted on this question. And then own the future. So we focus on impact and creating value. And that means the organizations we help are fundamentally better prepared to succeed in the future. So just so delighted to be here with you and to talk about how to create and enable a culture of innovation.
Thank you, Natalie and Helen. It is such a privilege to be here with leaders from just such incredible organizations as Settlement and Innosight. Now, before we delve into our topic of innovation, we'd like to hear from the audience using the Slido poll that I mentioned, slido.com. You can see how to access that on the presentation there. We have instructions for getting to Slido here, and we would like you to provide your response to this. What is the single word that describes the biggest barrier to adopting new behaviors within your organization? So as that's coming in, as that's starting to come in, and I realize you might need a second to get onto Slido again, and oh, here, we're already seeing responses come in live. Wow. I mean, I think this is such a great question because we all know there's the sort of vision of where we want to get to, and then there are all the things that could stand in the way from getting there. And we already see a couple of them. Fear is always a big one, isn't it?
Yeah, that one always comes up. The one, I love the one, the exclamation point. We tried that before.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I read something recently. I mean, we are such funny creatures as humans, right? Because we are averse to change, and yet we're always striving for better, right? And those two things don't necessarily go together, right? And I think that some of these words are reflecting that sort of tension between the, in that sort of self-contradiction there. Uncertainty, that's definitely a big one. Oh, well, somebody pulled out the B word, budget. or the F word, finances.
Yeah, I know, and funding, I saw that. And overworked. For those of us who work at nonprofits, we are familiar with that as well.
Yeah, and hierarchy. I think that's an interesting one. People feeling like they don't have maybe the permission to try new things.
Yeah.
This is great. Well, if you're out there in the audience and still want to contribute, please do. I think, you know, there's a general genre of vocabulary here that we'll be digging into throughout the presentation here. So just seeing if there is anything else. Negativity, I saw that. Yeah, absolutely. So let's see, can I turn to you, Natalie, to then, you know, talk about, you know, what is innovation? And what kinds of things, you know, through Innosight and through the organizations you work with, do you see as truly innovative?
Absolutely. And in our work, we always start with a definition because we want to be operating from a common language, and innovation can be intimidating. So the way we think about it is innovation is something, it's about doing something different that creates value. In theory, it's quite simple, right? When you read that, but in practice, it's much, much trickier. I mean, we just saw all of those things that get in the way because essentially organizations, no matter the type, they're set up to perpetuate today, to make the way that you work today more efficient and more effective. So when you start to do things that are different, they become disruptive, and not in the good sense of the word disruptive. It's also tricky because I think the word innovation comes with a lot of baggage. When we hear it, we tend to look to those organizations like the big tech companies in Silicon Valley, like to Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google, and that's great, except they have unique origin stories, and you might be copying the thing that's not the most helpful. So while it can be helpful, it can also make innovation feel just out of reach. And what we found is innovation happens in so many more types of organizations where we, you know, typically don't look for inspiration, but we should. Organizations like Settlement Music School, Salvation Army, UNICEF. We profile a lot of these in the books, and we call them normal organizations doing extraordinary things, or no debts, because we're consultants and we love acronyms. So, you know, we're here to talk today about a culture of innovation, and that's one in which the behaviors that drive innovation success come naturally. They just become part of the way work gets done. And the key word to hone in on here is behavior. So it's not necessarily, you know, the values written up on the wall, or the well-stocked cafeteria, or the ping pong table, you know, in the employee room, but it's what you see people do on a day-to-day basis. What are those day-to-day rituals and habits? And through our field work, you know, the work that we get to do with our clients and research, we've identified 5 core behaviors, and we'll go into each one of those in more depth. But when you see those on a regular basis, that's a good sign that there is a culture of innovation, one in which the organization is really able to navigate uncertainty and meet just today's, you know, ever-changing demands and needs. And another thing I'll just mention about these behaviors is they're not something, you know, that only a select few are privileged to have. It's very accessible. It's something we can all do. And actually, Scott Anthony, one of the book's co-authors, in the book, he talks about his 4 children and how he never had to teach them to be creative. These are just things that come naturally to children, and we've all seen that. So kind of concluding thought here is innovation is not just the job of the few, but it truly is the responsibility of the many, and it can be driven from any part in an organization. And we really like geeked out and got excited when Ed Catmull, who's a co-founder of Pixar, read our book and endorsed our book, and really loved this quote from him, which is, if you want to unleash more creativity in your organization, you can't simply tell people what you want. You need to create a culture that emboldens them. I just love that word, to behave like innovators. And you need to trust that this is what they want to do. So 2 things I think are really important for leaders is having that belief that your team and your people can do this, and trusting them to lean into these behaviors.
Right. And I'll just add one point. I mean, you should definitely check out Natalie's book, Eat, Sleep, Innovate. You should also check out Ed Catmull's book, Creativity, Inc., which is a fantastic book on just that process that's spoken to in this quote. So let me turn to Helen, and you have a wonderful perspective on artistic and musical innovation. So perhaps you can speak to that.
Thanks. So why are artists positioned so well to innovate? Something we think a lot about at Settlement. We can start with how we're educated in our craft. I'll speak specifically to music here because it's what I know best. It's also what the vast majority of teachers and administrators here at Settlement Music School have been educated in since we were children. Through studying music, we learned a great deal. That music builds imagination and intellectual curiosity. It develops our creativity, critical thinking, and listening skills. It builds our language and reasoning. It teaches us that discipline and problem solving are needed to improve in our craft. It shows us how to focus on the smallest of details and the big picture too. William Linzer, my viola teacher at Juilliard, drilled that into me when I was learning the Franck Sonata so many years ago. Every single note is important, but don't forget the phrasing of the entire work. And I spent almost an entire year with him on that piece. And music shows us how to take a risk responsibly. If you've ever played an instrument, do you remember your first recital? How it felt to walk on stage to perform? Here's hoping you overcame that fear and that victory has stayed with you for a lifetime. We see that happen here every week. And when our faculty support our students to get up on that stage, we see the pride that they experience at a job well done. We have seen truly touching moments. So intellectual curiosity, listening skills, language and reasoning, discipline, macro and micro understanding, courage. How do we harness this knowledge at Settlement to create a culture of innovation? Satya Nadella at Microsoft shares, I like to think that the C in CEO stands for culture. The CEO is the curator of an organization's culture. Anything is possible for a company when its culture is about listening, learning, and harnessing individual passions and talents to the company's mission. This translated to our settlement world is that we are in service. As administrators, we are to be in service to our students and our families. Our administrators also understand that this culture of service translates to our faculty. And when you fundamentally believe this, then a culture of innovation can flourish.
Wow. So many incredible insights, I think, that you raised there, Helen. I particularly love the sort of tension that you set up between, particularly in music, the detail-oriented nature that is required in musicianship, and yet being able to deal with larger scale form and phrasing simultaneously. Yes, you have to do both, because I think that's true about innovation. You have to look at the big picture, but the details really matter as well. So I know through Innosight's work and Natalie's work, there are particular behaviors that are very correlated or that drive innovation. So from this next segment, we're going to go through these behaviors, and Natalie will kind of introduce us to that, and then we'll get a reflection of how that's implemented at Settlement Music School. So Natalie, can I take it? Can I give it to you?
Thanks, Youngmoo. So we'll go through each of these behaviors in detail. And one thing I'll just share is we found the more granular you can be about that behavior and what it looks like, the better. The words also might look different from organization to organization, but fundamentally, these are the 5 things that we think, really matter. And it starts with curiosity. So do we see people in the organization questioning the status quo and consistently searching for different and better ways to do things? And some of the specific behaviors under that is, do we see people in meetings saying, what if, or how might we? Or do we see leaders maybe not shutting down ideas by saying things like, oh, that's just the way things are done here. I'm sure we've all said that, heard that, and guilty of that. Or do we see people adopting more of a problem solver than a fault finder mindset? So that's curiosity is the first one.
Fantastic. And Helen, you already brought this up, the curious nature in musicianship, but can you tell us a little more about how that's implemented through your work at Settlement?
Absolutely. I believe that we're an institution filled with curious people. Artists by nature are lifelong learners. We strive to have a growth mindset, which sees challenges as invitations and clues to new approaches. With a growth mindset outlook, failure is not a failure. It's a path to greater understanding. Success is in going through the learning process. We believe in this growth mindset so strongly that we've established it school-wide as one of the primary tenets of our teaching and learning philosophy. We endeavor to harness a growth mindset, not just in our students, but in our thinking and planning as an institution. We found that one of Innosight's approaches to strategic planning is an outstanding way to approach change through the lens of a growth mindset. Too often, strategic planning starts from a deficit, from a lack, and it enables complaints and bad feelings to arise very quickly. With Future Back, and I quote Innosight, you and your team undertake an effort to actively, intensively, and imaginatively immerse yourself in your organization's likely future environment so you can determine what you must do to thrive in it. Then you walk that vision back to the present in the form of concrete initiatives. So for the past 10 years, we have used Future Back to focus our planning not on what the world is today, but what it will be 3, 5, and 10 years from now. 3 years ago at our annual faculty meeting, we asked the following questions. What will student learning look like in the year 2027? What will motivate students to learn to play an instrument, sing, or dance in 2027? One of the many thoughtful ideas that came out of this is that our teachers believed in the investment Settlement was making in reaching all communities in the Philadelphia region, and that student learning would need to happen in many different spaces and in many different ways. They believed that we needed to double down our efforts and bring out our best creativity to the table, and that is what we have done. In a typical year, we now have 50 community partnerships on a weekly basis.
Yeah, that is such a fantastic, not just story, but just, I mean, I love that thinking about that process, incorporating the growth mindset. And by the way, I mean, if you can tell me exactly what learning is going to be like in 2027, I would love to know. I think we all, but more generally, it is the commitment to that process, right? That's something we're going to build together and grow into rather than dictate and define. Yeah. Right? And I think that's wonderful. Natalie, let's continue. So what's the second behavior?
So the second one is customer obsession. So tapping into that empathy to really walk in the shoes of your customers or stakeholders or colleagues, whoever that might be, to really understand what are the problems they're trying to solve, or what we call, what are their jobs to be done. So specifically, some behaviors around customer obsession would be, are we seeing people create customer journey maps, for example? In meetings, are people asking, okay, what customer need or problem are we solving here? And just how much time is spent out with customers and understanding their jobs to be done?
And we bantered a little bit about this previously, but you know, using the word customer or customer focus is sometimes thought in a negative way at a nonprofit or in education, right? We don't necessarily think of our constituents as customers, but absolutely, they're you know, they are our customers, and actually it's much even broader than that. So, Helen, let me turn to you. And how do you think about this customer obsession through the work of Settlement?
Exactly. So our customers are our students. So customer obsession has been something we have grown into over the last 10 years. We have transitioned through many conversations from an organization that requires our families to fit our timelines and our expectations to one that identifies what job our families are trying to get done. Why are they coming to Settlement? This approach has been incredibly helpful and sparked by Innosight. This philosophy made it so much easier to meet our students and families when the world changed on March 12th and we had to close for in-person instruction. We launched a tech team of 15 people to help move our faculty and students online. Our staff was available almost around the clock as they took calls from their living rooms and their kitchen tables. We honored the diversity of our student population and translated our distance learning handbooks into 6 languages and put them up on our website for easy access. We offered lessons both live and recorded so that we could try to accommodate every student's situation. And we created new ways of communicating quickly and effectively about issues that needed to be addressed. We worked tirelessly to remove all barriers for student participation. In this case, our customers were also our faculty. We delivered equipment to faculty who didn't have the tools to teach from home, and in some cases, faculty who had never even been on the internet. Yes, we got one of our faculty members up, and I personally delivered the computer to her home. And we got them up and teaching, which was so exciting. Like a little celebration was had at settlement when these faculty members joined. Some of those late adopter teachers are even giving our staff pointers now on online teaching. So that's what you get with a growth mindset around here.
And this is why I am such a huge fan of Helen and Settlement Music School. I think the transition, I mean, this is the hardest thing there probably is to do, right? Yes, the world changed on all of us, you know, last spring. And organizations were left with a very stark choice. You can adapt to this current constraint, or you could just throw up your hands. And I think, you know, this example shows just that, you know, you solve the problems, you make it work somehow, you approach it with that growth mindset, as you said, and you can accomplish things that you probably thought might have been impossible beforehand. So I love that story. Okay, next, actually, I don't have a favorite, but this is actually kind of my favorite of the 5 years. So Natalie, can you introduce us to the next one?
I think if I can just comment on the last one too, I learned I should start using the word constituents. That's another one instead of customer, and then we can keep up with our C theme. But just the agility from the story you shared, Helen, is so inspiring. I think something a lot of organizations, you know, can draw inspiration from. So on to Youngmoo's favorite one, collaborative. Innovation happens at the intersections. It happens at the intersections of people, ideas, business model, technology. And how do you create conditions where those creative collisions can take place? So specifically in organizations, when collaboration is happening, you're seeing things like there are cross-functional teams with diverse expertise and viewpoints that are coming together. You're actively seeking for external stimuli and looking to borrow and adapt. We're constantly looking at different industries in the work that we do to be inspired. And then, you know, importantly, you're seeing a focus on collective rather than individual goals.
I mean, and of course I'm biased because I direct a center for transdisciplinary collaboration. but I will say, I think that everyone can has some experience with it. It's very easy to say we're collaborative. It is so much harder to actually be collaborative. So, but Helen, I know you have some great examples of collaboration that you're pursuing as well.
Collaboration is so important at our school, and we believe that our approach has always been collaborative. But this definitely went into overdrive in March and still continues at this heightened level today. Our authors of Eat, Sleep, Innovate write, "The smartest person in the room is often the room itself." I love that quote. We were already well positioned to take on this level of collaboration because we've had the incredible good fortune to work with our colleagues in the city in one of the most dynamic and interesting partnerships in our field. The Philadelphia Music Alliance for Youth Artists Initiative, or what we call PMA. And I have to give a shout out, I think two of my PMA colleagues are on the phone right now, Louis Scallione of the PYO Music Institute and Denise Kinney of Musicopia, for all you Philadelphians, terrific organizations. Philadelphia and Settlement's 8 partner institutions were the first in the country to receive multi-million-dollar funding from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation to identify and support students from underrepresented communities who wish to become professional classical musicians. I personally take enormous joy in all of the idea sharing that happens in Settlement, especially now, and how we've created together a culture where people feel it's safe to share ideas and let them be worked through as a group. As a result, new ideas have flourished and new relationships have been formed even during a pandemic. And as Youngmoo mentioned earlier, our Director of Education, Karen Ornstein, developed this wonderful music technology program with the Excite Center, where they work together to create new approaches to reaching students of various levels and with all different technologies.
Yeah, and oh gosh, we had, well, we're still doing it, but it's had such a great time working with Karen and her team. I'll just note that that was not the original plan, right? This was not a COVID project to begin with, or a virtual project to begin with. It was going to be very much an in-person program. And of course, like many, we just had to adapt and find a different way and try to reach an audience, through the methods and media that were available, right? Not everyone has, a really high-powered computer or desktop at home. Not everyone has a high-speed internet connection. So adapting and then working together through the collaboration to solve some of those problems has been just a pleasure. Okay, all right. I can't have multiple favorites, but I really do love this point.
You can have it. You can have it.
So, Dan, because this is, again, so key, especially, when we're talking about nonprofits and artistic organizations. So, Natalie, I'll turn it back to you.
I think this is coming to life in a lot of the stories that we're hearing. So is there an adeptness in ambiguity? Are people able to act confidently when there is imperfect information, and what that actually looks like? And I think this is one of the most powerful concepts that we can teach our client, which is just our clients asking this question of what needs to be true for us to be successful here? And then let's go out and test that. Let's prove or disprove that and run some thoughtful experiments. So in terms of specific, behaviors that we see people talking about assumptions over answers. We see people asking, how can we learn more? What can we do to learn more here? And then just designing experiments and embracing intelligent failure.
Yeah, well, and especially in this day and age where everything is so data or metric driven, right? Where you would love to have data to tell you the right answer, right? But we are not machines. We are not robots. And there's so many things we don't know the answers to. So Helen, tell us, how is settlement and how have you dealt with ambiguity?
Certainly. So in being adept at ambiguity, we're supposed to expect iteration and change and embrace this intelligent failure. So from the first moment that I received a call in February from my father, a research scientist, that the few COVID cases in Seattle were just the beginning of a worldwide pandemic, we took action. We knew immediately that our field was going to be disrupted as it never has been before. And we knew that unless online learning quickly became a strength of ours, we were going to have huge problems. In one meeting with our branch directors, just one, before we even closed for in-person instruction, we knew that we needed to market our online lessons to new families. An idea was put forward to offer a 4-lesson package, low commitment, an easy entry point. When almost all the students wanted to re-enroll for additional lessons after the introductory package, we realized that we had created an onerous process for administration to keep re-enrolling our online students. So now we offer enrollment for Settlement Music Online without an end date, which is so important. And we offer this to people who have never even set foot in our building. We have now 117 students from 7 states who have taken up this opportunity thus far. I just pulled the number yesterday because it changes daily, which we're thrilled about. Perhaps one day soon, our virtual student body will rival the size of one of our physical branches. I have to say, of course, that one-on-one in-person instruction is always best, but we're reaching those who never would have been able to have the settlement experience otherwise.
Yeah. And again, it's just more evidence that, when you have an adaptable organization, an innovative organization, right, you can respond to those conditions and see the possibilities, right? That, of course, we all prefer individual instruction, live instruction, but having virtual instruction or remote instruction offers new opportunities for distance, for different kinds of learning, different kinds of collaboration. And, I'm sure we'll touch upon this later, but hopefully some of those learnings will certainly fold back into our methods and our processes, hopefully if we can call a post-pandemic world as something we can sort of see, if we could even, knock on wood, that maybe we start to see that. All right, turning to, okay, we'll complete the circle here. So Natalie, why don't you tell us about the 5th behavior?
Absolutely. So the fifth behavior is almost one you wonder, do we need to state it? But it's to be empowered, which is if you're going to do something different, you have to do something. And so do you see people exercising initiative, seeking out and leveraging the resources at their disposal? You know, specifically, these are things like, you know, the old adage of ask for forgiveness rather than permission. Do you see people leaning into that more? Are there stories being told of like successes where people have been empowered and, you know, done something that's really been appreciated and valued by the organization, just like all these stories that Helen is sharing? And also, do people feel comfortable? Is there psychologically safe environment where people feel that they can speak up and say when something's not working? And can't really emphasize that enough, as well as this concept of growth mindset, where people are seeing the possibilities, the art of the possible, rather than a fixed mindset that's only honing in on the constraints.
Yeah. I'll remind our audience, by the way, that if you do have questions, I mean, particularly maybe about the 5 behaviors, feel free to put those in the Q&A section, and we will try to get to those, before we conclude the event. But of course, let's turn to Helen to provide her perspective and the settlement's perspective on empowerment.
Absolutely. So I guess I'm allowed to say that this is one of my favorites. So I, I really love Empowered. At Settlement, we have a shared leadership model, and I've made every effort to develop and support this model because it works. Everything good that has come out of the last 8 months has been due to staff, faculty, and board members stepping up and leading this with me. Developing a shared leadership model took time as a new CEO in 2010. One of our most important steps forward was when we had our first consultancy with Innosight 2 years after my arrival. At that time, we gave ourselves permission to focus on our ultimate purpose and not on the inevitable hierarchies that had grown in a 100-year-old institution. Our many episodes of trial and error, of tweaks, of calculated risks over the last 10 years gave us the stomach and the tools to pivot in this life-altering pandemic. So what has this taken? Consistent, regular meetings with administrators at all levels where we encourage every voice to be heard. We have not shied away from strong opinions and disagreements. And equally important is that a day does not go by where I've not asked my colleagues and opinions at least 5 times. Since March, I've been particularly grateful for our shared leadership model in making decisions about how to communicate with our 170 plus faculty members. So every communication that I have made has been fully vetted by our branch staff. They are the ones who work with our faculty every day, and I believe that they know best what our faculty have needed. This has meant that a draft of communication goes through at least 10 pairs of eyes, and it takes a few days, but I have to tell you, it's really worth it.
Fantastic. Okay, so we actually want to get some responses from the audience. Now that you've seen the 5 behaviors, and I'll recap those for you very, very quickly. Of course, the first is being curious. The second is being customer obsessed. The third, my favorite, is being collaborative. The fourth, my second favorite, being adept with ambiguity. And then Helen's favorite, empowerment, or being empowered empowering those within your organization. So we want you to go back to Slido and then reflect upon that. This is a poll. Which of these 5 behaviors are embraced and encouraged at your organization? So if you can go to slido.com, same code, settlement, and we'll start capturing some of those responses. And then, of course, if you have more specific questions, I still encourage you to put those into the Q&A section of Zoom, and we will start getting to those in just a moment here. But maybe if we can flip to Slido. Okay, we can start to see some responses coming in. It's like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? You know, you get to poll the audience, and then you get to see it come in.
Yeah.
So, okay, we're seeing obviously curiosity or being curious and customer obsessed are kind of more common, more prevalent.
Huh? Yeah, I'd say it's not too surprising to see empowered is lower because there were a lot of comments right around like funding or resources or hierarchy. Oh, it's moving up though. So.
You know, and ambiguity, dealing with ambiguity is one that is so challenging. I mean, especially, you know, if you have, you know, a medium-sized organization, a lot of people, And I find, I mean, this is one of my arguments why artistic experience and exposure is so important, because in, you know, in musical collaboration or performance, you have to be adept with ambiguity. You do not know how that performance is going to go or how it's going to turn out. You know, you can prepare, but, you know, hey, it might go a different way. You know, conductor might step up there and take a very different tempo, you know, intentionally or not.
Mhm.
I also have to say that as a nonprofit, you have to have a board who is really willing to embrace that adeptness and ambiguity, to be able to say to your board, I don't have all the data. I'm not positive this is going to work, but I want to try it. And then also have a board who appreciates that when something doesn't go well, that it's okay, right? That you learn from those failures, you improve. And I've been incredibly fortunate to have a board like Settlement that has been so supportive of our efforts and really understand what it means to do innovative work.
Yeah. I guess, is there anything surprising in this result thus far? I mean, obviously, I think it is relatively easy for organizations to say that they are customer obsessed, right? Because, you know, that is oftentimes literally the bottom line. But the others, I guess I thought that we would see a little more on the collaborative side, because I do think organizations are striving for that. But as we said before, in reality, that's often a goal that's hard to achieve.
Totally agree. Collaboration is one that's easy to talk about and hard to do. I will say, you know, what I like about what we did is we asked about what's working. A lot of organizations have a tendency to say, what's wrong? What aren't we doing? How do we fix that? But one of the things that I find is very helpful is to lean into that concept of appreciative inquiry, to say, where are those bright spots? Where are we doing something well? And how do we build on that? So it's great to see that the customer obsessed and kind of that empathy piece is going well as people being curious and challenging the status quo.
Yeah.
That's great to
Yeah.
see as well. I agree. I have to say, in working with my terrific colleagues across the city of Philadelphia through PMA, that we often say, if collaboration were easy, everyone would be doing it. It's really one of our mantras, because it is about being flexible. It's about coming to the table truly willing to collaborate, which means having a level of humility in the work, that you don't have all the answers, that the colleague sitting next to you has just as many great ideas as you have. And so I've been so fortunate that they definitely take that approach, that we all come to the table and we're all willing to roll up our sleeves and do the work.
Yeah. All right. We are getting some questions coming in from our audience. So perhaps let's turn to some of those now. Let's see, this one came in through the chat, but I think this is a great question. It says, I'm so inspired to see a 100-year-old organization pivot and make strategic choices to meet their mission and increase their value to their customers and the community. The person asking the question works for a healthcare system that is hunkered down instead of looking at ways to pivot, despite all of the pressures pre-pandemic and in our current world. Question, can you offer advice on how to push for innovation when it is not a cultural norm? It's a great question.
Yeah, do you want to start, Helen? Or?
Oh, you can start. I would love to hear what Innosight has to say, and then I'll jump in.
No, and I think healthcare is just so fascinating right now, because you're probably, you know, having to live into these behaviors without even consciously realizing it, right? Like how you need to collaborate and be adept in ambiguity, because there is so much ambiguity. My advice for this would be get granular on, like, what does collaboration, for example, look like within your healthcare system, or take any one of the behaviors and then run this exercise. We call it a beanstorm in the book. Again, back to those acronyms, but this idea of what is the behavioral blocker? What are you all doing instead of achieving that goal? So let's say it's collaboration. You're working towards a collective united goal. Well, what you're doing instead is maybe you're focused on your individual goals, or you're sitting and worrying about, how is this going to reflect on me, or how will others perceive me? And if you can go through this exercise together as a team to understand what are those blockers, and then put in place what we call a behavior enabler, an artifact, and a nudge. We go into that more in the book, but it's essentially drawing from behavioral science and using things like a behavior enabler would be a direct way of impacting the behavior, a checklist or a process. And then a nudge would be a more indirect, and an artifact would be some type of physical or digital reminder. And so happy to talk about this more, but what I would encourage you to do is have open conversations, understand what does innovation look like in your context, what's getting in the way, and then how might you put in place some simple behavioral interventions to nudge everyone the way you want to go.
So I would add that it's important to start small. And that this is something I learned from Innosight. We were as a case study in the Harvard Business Review, and I think it was 2014 when Scott Anthony wrote about something he called the minimal viable innovation system. I can't describe it as well as Scott, but the basic principle is that you have to be flexible enough to put an idea forward, and you just put forward a small idea and then be able to change course as it's happening. So you don't try to make a pronouncement in a leadership position like mine to say, okay, we're going to be completely innovative now in everything that we do, but to take one idea from one employee and to institute it, and just know that you're not going to make an enormous investment in that one new idea. But even if you have some small successes with it, and you start to improve on that idea, that you celebrate those successes. And I would say that is absolutely key. When I have a branch director who launches a new program, and it can just be small, it can be one class, but when you get enough enrollment to run the class and you give the financial aid to the students that they need, then it should be celebrated. It's just 4 kids. It has to really be heralded across the institution that something new and wonderful is happening that came from an idea from one of my colleagues.
I'd like to add that, there are actually very, very few organizations that are truly innovative top to bottom, right? I mean, they'll talk about it, they'll say they're innovative. I mean, it's wonderful when an organization like Settlement and has a CEO like Helen that really commits to this and then, changes a culture. But there are very, very few organizations, large organizations, where that's true at all levels. So, I work for a very large organization, Drexel University. You can find, what I do is I try to find pockets, right? Not everything is always going to be open to the new ideas or to the, going outside the box. But, whether that pocket is just yourself, whether that pocket is, you and a small group of colleagues or friends, there are ways to start implementing, I think, these behaviors on a smaller scale, and hopefully feel more empowered in doing that to then start to branch out beyond that initial circle. All right, let's see, we have a lot of questions here. Let's do this one. This was for Natalie, actually. Can you give an example of how an organization or department transformed itself through the development of one or more of these behaviors?
Absolutely. So an example I'll give, which is profiled in the book, is of a bank, DBS Bank, which is based in Singapore. So we mentioned Scott Anthony, who's based out there, and I had a chance to immerse with this client for a month a couple of years ago. And essentially they were on this transformation to go from being a stodgy bank, as a matter of fact, they were known as damn bloody slow, to becoming a fully digital bank. So they had this, big ambition, really driven from the top. And this journey started just about 2008, so the height of the financial crisis. And they, put in place a lot of, I'd say, bigger strategic initiatives, like putting the customer at the center of everything that they do, transitioning from legacy systems and from relying on outside vendors to bringing that technology in-house. But if you talk to the CEO and one of our co-authors on the book, Paul Cobbin, he'll tell you the most important and critical piece was the focus on behaviors. And they did a lot of work, but it was interesting. One of the biggest things getting in their way, and it's kind of a mundane concept, but was just the way they ran meetings. The meeting culture was terrible. Meetings started late, and the decisions weren't made. It wasn't clear who was in charge. There was no agenda. People weren't speaking up. And so they put in place one of these interventions that they called Mojo, Meeting Owner, Joyful Observer. So for every meeting, there's someone who's in charge of the agenda, making sure decisions get made, and also ensuring there's equal share of voice. So to this question around behaviors, this truly was around collaboration and agility. Because I said, how can we collaborate if not everybody feels comfortable speaking up? So as a way to create a safe environment. And then kind of the nudge of this effort was called the joyful observer. So somebody has a role in every meeting to say, did we do everything we wanted to do, and to give feedback to that meeting owner. So just one small thing that they did that's had a big impact. And I'm very pleased to report that they have won Best Bank in the World and some of the most prestigious banking awards that you can get out there.
It's really amazing. I just want to echo one small piece of this, which is starting and ending meetings on time. I have to say we have little advantage there with musicians because they understand that showing up on time means 5 minutes early, but it's a sign of respect for all of your colleagues when you are leading a meeting to start and end it on time. And I think that's absolutely critical because people are busy and they really want to know what the expectations are during the meeting. And of course, having an agenda, not an easy task many times, but putting that agenda together is absolutely critical for having your employees feel supported.
Absolutely. I'll just do a plus 100% on that. Let's see, here's another question. Maybe Helen, I'll direct this towards you. Employees, people really, have widely varying tolerances for failure, risk-taking, and uncertainty. How do you bring everyone to the same level so they can move forward as a group?
Yeah. I think I would start with really getting to know your employees. I think that's so important for understanding how people respond to criticism, to suggestions, to new ways of doing things. And there are people who have such a deep understanding when something doesn't go well, and you know those employees that don't waste your time sitting down and talking about what didn't go right. They know what didn't go right. I think it's more important that you sit down and the question you ask the employees, how can I better support you? What is it I can do so that you feel you have more of what you need next time to bring that idea forward or launch that new program? I think if you create that type of culture, then you remove this idea of blame, because blame is so it can cause so much angst in your employees, and it is not productive at all. And so I've definitely tried that approach, and I believe that is what we often call the culture of kindness at Settlement, that it is pervasive throughout the institution, because we really do take that approach to new ideas and really making sure people aren't feeling anxious about their work.
Natalie, did you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, no, I love that. Just one even simple technique that you can do is if people are worried, you say, okay, let's brainstorm all the ways that this thing can go wrong. And then oftentimes you realize like, it's not that big a deal. Like maybe the biggest risk is nobody shows up at your webinar. Like, is that really? So just kind of leaning into it and then going out and testing it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add to that. Yeah, absolutely. Getting those fears out on paper, right, or on a board, or just at least out in the air, right? Because people internalize those things, and so much to the point where they think that this is just the way it has to be. So there's getting it out, and then of course, when you do have some data, when you can bring some more objective perspectives to it, that can also help overcome those fears, or at least, you know, be honest about, hey, this is what we have, here's what we don't know, right? And we could do that. We could do nothing, which is probably going to result in the same result, or we can try something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Helen, were you saying something?
No.
Oh, okay, sorry. Didn't want to cut you off. Okay, a couple more questions here. Let's see. Well, okay, these are hard questions. Let's see. How might this model of mentorship or small group work within a really large organization function to cultivate some of the 5 behaviors? Anybody want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I mean, I can start. I think it goes back to something Helen said at the beginning, which is you can start small. You can start in your small team. And Megan, thank you for posting in the chat. We have lots of, and I'll speak to these at the end, but we have lots of resources and things that you can use to just get inspired and kind of kickstart. We have like a little assessment where you can test your team and see, are you really living into these 5 behaviors? So I love that question. And I think that's absolutely the right way to start, is start small. And then to this point around mentorship is model what you want to see in others, you know, be the change you want to see.
Yeah, I would also say that we have 300 employees at Settlement, and something that's important to me is making sure that there's a high level of communication among all the staff in different areas, whether it's branch staff or central administrative staff. And so we created this wonderful committee that we called Moving the Big Ideas Forward. And we drew people in from all these different areas of Settlement. And so we were able to create what was a relatively small group, but put these philosophies into practice, this idea of mentoring, this idea of bringing ideas forward in a psychologically safe environment, so that then they could take it back to their own departments. And we found that we were able to move a lot of our most important ideas forward over the past several years through this type of work.
All right. We are running near to the end of our event time. I want to squeeze in one more question, but it's a hard one.
Oh, no.
How might we create a common cohesive culture in an organization with branches in different countries?
I mean, maybe a pandemic premium, if you will, is that Zoom has brought us all together and made this a little bit easier almost to connect with different branches, different countries, different groups.
Yeah,
go ahead, Helen.
I would say for Settlement, we do have 6 branches, and we are spread very far out in the Philadelphia region. But I think it just goes back to regular communication and opportunity for our branch staff to get together and really make time to listen about what makes each community different, so that you can respond as an institution and you don't make assumptions that one program that will work at our branch at Winfield will work at our branch in the Northeast, and leaving time and space for those kinds of discussions.
Yeah. And I'll call back to something you mentioned earlier, Helen, in that transition. You did a lot of translation, right, of materials and documents, right, which isn't always at front of mind, but especially if you have an organization spanning different cultures, different languages, right, those are the sorts of things that you can and must do, but leaning into then the opportunities of the remote working, remote collaboration, looking for those opportunities rather than fixating on the constraints.
Yeah. We talked about what students might be doing in 2027 earlier. What we know is our virtual world isn't going anywhere, right? And this is here to stay. And we're going to take full advantage of telling the Settlement story as far and wide as we can.
Fantastic. All right, we're almost at time. So certainly, I know you both have some closing thoughts here. So if we can go to one of the closing slides. What is your advice? How can other people take what they've learned in this very brief moment of time and carry something forward?
You want to kick us off, Helen?
Sure. So I want to share that with all the examples that I gave, I do not profess to be the most innovative leader, nor are we the most innovative organization. We follow the mantra of Eat, Sleep, Innovate authors. Innovation is about doing something different that creates value. And we have created value. Our approach removes the paralysis that can happen so often with organizations who think that they're just not doing things well enough, especially with arts organizations who can live constantly with the fear that they're just not creative enough. So why are we talking about this? It's not just Settlement. And I feel that this is really important to share. All organizations have the capacity to innovate. And why should we care? Well, this is how people are spending their days. To be inspired is critical right now. Many people's only meaningful engagement with the outside world is through their job. And people need to be heard and feel like they are contributing to a greater good. It's absolutely essential to our well-being.
Well said. So well said. And then Natalie, can you tell us how to find out more about all of these wonderful things that you've talked about and are doing?
Absolutely. So the book, of course, Eat, Sleep, Innovate, recommend. And also, like I mentioned, we have a digital hub, so eatsleepinnovate.com. We have an assessment that's available there. We've got lots of just tools to help inspire you. And we do a lot of these virtual book clubs as well. So I encourage you to join those. And I just love Helen's concluding thoughts. And one of the things we write in the book is, I think we spend on average 90,000 hours in our life at work. So let's make the most of it. Let's enjoy it. Let's bring our most creative selves forward. So just thank you all for having us.
Thank you for joining today.
Yes, and thank you both, Helen, Natalie. This has been such a wonderful conversation. I have so much I'm going to be digging into after this. I'll thank our audience. Thanks for sticking with us and all the great questions. And we look forward to convening around these topics, as I'm sure we all will, in our own ways. So thanks again. And the talk will be posted online, both I think through Innosight and Settlement. So if you want to go back and revisit some of these moments, the talk will be available in the near future. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.